The next thing we're going to go ahead and cover is punctuation, and we have quite a few little pieces of punctuation that we're going to have to be really familiar with on the test. Alright, and the first punctuation markup is the comma. So you use commas all the time, but there are specific reasons for why you do it. So let's go ahead and go over them. So the first reason that you would use a comma is to separate an item, items, not one item, in a list or a series. So for instance, I got eggs, comma, milk, comma, and bread at the store. So we're putting a comma after each of our new items, not the last one. So the first two, they get a comma after them, and then you have the last one. Okay, so that one you probably use pretty often. The next one is to set off non-essential information. So that's when you have a sentence and then it kind of takes a break to tell you something interesting, and then you keep on going. So we have, my friend Joe, who is a great cook, made me a cake for my birthday. So the idea is that who is a great cook is non-essential information, because if I took it out, it would still be a sentence. So if you're ever looking through a sentence and you think you might need a comma or you might want to take away a comma, just test this one simple thing to see if there's non-essential info. You take out anything in between the commas and you see if it can be a sentence. So in this case, you would have, my friend Joe made me a cake for my birthday. Great, that's a sentence, which means the information between those two commas is non-essential, and it should be between two commas. All right, the next thing that you can use a comma to do is to set off an intro phrase. So very similar to the non-essential info, it's where you have a phrase in the beginning that's a little extra explanation, and then you have comma the rest of the sentence. So for instance, in June, Amy will go to Texas. We could have this sentence without the in June part at all. Amy will go to Texas. So just like non-essential information, you should be able to, you should be able to get rid of the intro info and still have a sentence on your hands. So in June, you can get rid of it. So you want to have in June, comma, Amy will go to Texas. And shout out to anybody who's from Texas. Okay, the next way that you want to use a comma is if you're going to separate two independent clauses. Basically, like if you're going to fix a run-on with a fan voice conjunction, you have to also have a comma with that. So for instance, I love art, comma, but, that's a fan voice conjunction, I struggle with art history. If we took out the comma and the word but, we would have a run-on or two separate sentences. We stuck a period in there. So by having a comma and then a fan voice conjunction, we don't have a run-on, and we have on our hands a proper sentence. Okay, so those are the 4 ways that they're going to test you on commas on the test. So remember, items in a list or series, setting off non-essential information, setting off introductory information, or if you're going to fix a run-on or separate two independent clauses with a fan voice conjunction. Our next little set of punctuation marks would be colons and semicolons. So colons are going to emphasize or introduce short phrases, questions, explanations, examples, or lists. So they actually do a lot of things. The classic example that I can think of is when you see an extremely dry, boring looking textbook and it has a short title, maybe 3 words or so, and then colon and a huge explanation, that is a proper use of a colon, because what it's doing is it is emphasizing and explaining what the title means. So I just made up a book title. So Transformation, a Study of Evolution. So that would be an appropriate use of a colon, because transformation doesn't tell us a whole lot about what this book's about, but then afterwards it's an explanation. So, oh, we're talking about evolution, that kind of transformation. All right, so colons, that's all they're going to do. They're going to emphasize or introduce something that explains, basically what else is going on in the sentence. Okay, semicolons have two basic functions that we're going to look at. So the first should be familiar to you guys from the earlier slide on run-ons, because a semicolon is a great way to fix a run-on. So if you're just going to fix a run-on without doing anything else in terms of fanboys conjunctions or transition words, you can just stick a semicolon in between the two independent clauses. So, I love tea, semicolon, I feel better in the mornings after brewing a pot of tea. You could actually get away with just saying a pot and then getting rid of tea, but we're being extra super specific. So you can fix a run-on with a semicolon. And the other way that you're going to use semicolons, if you already have a list and you have a list of lists. So I'll go ahead and write down an example of that because it's a little bit easier to see than to explain what a list of lists is. Okay, so it's a little bit hard to get an example like this to fit on the screen, but for a list of lists we have Joe bought eggs, comma, milk, comma, and tea, semicolon, because normally I'd put a comma there, but then it gets really confusing, so it has to be a semicolon. Amy bought lettuce, rice, and corn, semicolon, and I bought bacon, sugar, and apples. So because I already have lists and I'm already using commas, I have to use a semicolon the same way that I would normally use a comma. So you get to use semicolons when you've essentially run out of the commas that you can use in a sentence. Okay, nice job. We are still moving on with a couple more things in terms of punctuation, and we'll go ahead and do dashes next. Okay, so the first thing that you can use a dash for is to show us that there's some sort of hesitation or a break in thought. So this is going to be mostly when there's dialogue. So you could say, she has red hair. No, wait, it's blonde now, or it is blonde now. So the idea is that the character, whoever is saying this, this little piece of dialogue, thought one thing and then halfway through changed their mind. So dashes are going to be used when suddenly whoever's talking kind of changes their mind or goes on to a totally different topic. The idea is that the dash indicates that something has suddenly happened or something has suddenly changed. It's also for hesitation. The person was like kind of sure of what they were saying, and then suddenly they're not sure anymore and they have to think about it. Okay, so that's going to be when you're looking at dialogue, mostly that's where you'll see that kind of dash. But then there's another type of dash. So you can also use a dash to set off some sort of explanation, so a phrase, a couple words, etc., inside a sentence. So this isn't going to be like an introductory phrase that you use commas for, but this is in the middle of a sentence. There's an explanation of some sort. All right, so here's an example. Miss Wilson has prepared her students for all aspects of the test. Dash, multiple choice, FRQs, and DBQs. So those three things are components of a test, and they're explaining what kind of test or what's on the test. You also could have two dashes if you had, if you had more of the sentence after DBQ. For instance, you could say something like, Miss Wilson has prepared her students for all aspects of the test, multiple choice, FRQs, and DBQs, dash, so that they will feel confident on the APUSH exam. So that would also work out just as well. So I'm going to go ahead and modify that one so that you have the example I just wrote, and then this one. They're both equally valid, by the way. So let's see. She's prepared for them for all aspects of the test, so that they will ace the APUSH exam. Okay. So those are the two ways that you're going to use dashes. There's only two, which is pretty nice. And next we're going to go ahead and look at apostrophes. So I'll give you guys a second to look at that nice big sentence that I wrote down in case you're taking notes, but we're going to be moving on to apostrophes now. Okay, so apostrophes they also have, they're used in two different instances that we're going to look at. So the first is if you are going to make a contraction. So for instance, it's with an apostrophe s means it is, and theirs with an apostrophe s means there is. So the apostrophe s generally means that you take the first word, and then it's the first word, and then is or was or are, etc. So it's with an apostrophe cold outside means it is cold outside, versus if you used it's without the apostrophe, you could say like the house and its neighborhood are beautiful, for instance. So it's a different type of it. Okay, and then the next type is going to be when you have a possessive. So the word that you're looking at, it essentially owns something else. So possessive form of nouns. So we could say Terry's dad is a great guy. So in this one way, Terry kind of possesses his dad. That sounds a little weird, but it's Terry's dad, not anyone else's. And then our nation's leaders work in D.C. So it can be a person, it can be a thing, but the noun owns whatever happens after it. Okay, and that's pretty much all that you have to know about apostrophes, so contractions and possessive forms of nouns. And then the last thing that they can bring up, these ones are going to be pretty simple, are periods, explanation points, and question marks. So these ones are pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to put them up anyway. So punctuation periods, they happen at the end of a sentence. So they end your thought that you're having. A question mark indicates a question of some sort, and then an exclamation point indicates high stakes, intense emotion, or volume. High volume, not low volume. So if you're yelling or you're super happy, you're excited, you can use an exclamation point to convey that to your readers. So the idea with these is if there's a question mark and there's no question, a period would probably be more warranted unless the person was extremely excited, in which case you could have an exclamation point. Explanation points are allowed on some of these passages. They'll use them. The idea is just make sure that they logically make sense and that the person who's writing it has a tone that matches the excitement level of using an explanation point. If it's very dry and boring and there's suddenly an explanation point, then you really shouldn't have one and you'd opt to have a period instead. So speaking of explanation points, good job with an explanation point. Be sure to check out the next video because that's going to cover the other half of the English section, and also make sure to do the practice video on this because knowing all of these things that you've just learned is extremely helpful in terms of doing well on the test, but you do need to look at it in terms of not just sentences, but in terms of a whole passage so that you can really get an idea of how the ACT is going to test you on it. All right, great job, guys, and I will see you at the next English rhetorical skills video.